Thank you very much for your introduction, and also big thanks to Orla for the opportunity to come here to Dublin, to this fabulous city, unfortunately for not very long. And it very much reminds me that what we are doing in this city in Dublin is being in a culture which architecturally is one of the strongest in Europe at the moment. We have some of the finest European architects coming out of this city. This city is punching well above its weight. Grafton architects, you've got O'Donnell and Toomey, you've got Hennig and Penn, you've got people like de Blanche de Meer, and what you've got is an extraordinary culture. And that is economically extremely valuable, because that's an export income that's bringing money forward. And slightly, what I'd like to sort of highlight to you is that none of them are particularly satisfied with the course of public procurement. They all have been enormously critical. And what I'm hoping to do is not slightly what is billed, but just to outline some of the small issues and elements that I've been addressing with 3 architectural colleagues in London to try and respond to many of the concerns that these architects have been raising. Because what we discovered in my role as chair of the RIBA Procurement Reform Group in 2011 is that a lot of what we have been doing in the last few years in public sector procurement, the acquiring of contractors, architects, engineers, landscape consultants, and other specialists in the field of construction industry, is doing so without actually adequate evidence. So 4 of us have got together, subsequent to our early engagement in the field of reform in the public procurement directives at EU level and UK national level, to implement a few minor changes through the auspices of the organisation Project Compass. The CISD stands for the fact that it's a community interest company, it's voluntary, we put in this work in our spare time, and we are sort of seeking to embed some of the reforms that have been moving forward, specifically those ones that improve clarity, access and professionalism in UK public procurement in the construction field. Now, because we're architects and our resources are fairly limited, we started off from the architectural remit, expanding to look at those areas. Most of the modules which I'm going to show you are expandable to other areas of the construction industry and the design sector. Now, the RIBA survey in 2011, which I referred to earlier, reported that for the procurement of consultancy services, the architectural sector was spending £42 million acquiring £126 million of work. As a business model, that is extremely inefficient and ineffective. And this accorded with evidence that was coming through from the European Union to say that right across the procurement sector, at low threshold values, almost 30% of the economic cost of a procurement or a contract was being spent on the procurement alone. So what that means is in the construction sector, with the evidence that we had from the RIBA, we knew that more than 30% of the actual cost of each and every contract was being expended in the actual procurement. Now that's the economic cost of the client and all the bidders added together. But that economic cost is draining from the economies of our country. So what we've been looking at is using simple digital mechanisms that are fairly robust to try and give you or people the way to actually publicly procure at far lower cost, to save money, to make things more efficient. What we're particularly fascinated by is the Amazon model, where you can go onto your phone and you can go through extremely difficult, complex transactions backed up by huge complexity in a number of simple strokes. And accessibility is improved by this, improved enormously in this way. So we've been using and looking at these digital models to try and increase transparency and access, and at the same time, thus, improve efficiencies. And one of the first things we've done is we've set up a portal which delivers this, which is called Project Compass. And this has three primary functions. It has the fulcrum, which is the front page, and that is what you see there with those 4 green boxes. And those green boxes scroll across the page when you click the tab, and they go from green towards increasingly red tabs as you run out of time on the notice call. So this is a simple access portal for consultants wishing to get access to public contract notices. And it's free. It costs no one anything. You can get it by Twitter feed and RSS, and it is arranged, as I say, according to the colour at the time that you've still got available to actually respond to the notice. You can filter it by regions, award type, procedure, and such like. So this is particularly valuable for architects who previously had to pay anything up to £500 to get a subscription service if they wished to be notified of public competition notices. And that they can now get this, but not only that, is by clicking on different parts of this, they can access information directly about the notices or the documents that go with it, and they can also get call-up information about the clients, who they're previously awarded to, and scrutinise the procedure. Underpinning this, we are capturing all the metadata and scraping all those notices and all the information that goes with it to build up a database, which I will tell you about later. The second function is Sesame, Open Sesame, named after, of course, the Arabian Nights, and this allows for transparent procurement data, and this is where we give real-time data analysis of all that's happening in the market in terms of these notices. So sector-specific, we now are building up a fabulous knowledge of the construction sector by grabbing this. We then have Compass, which is guidance and training. So that's, which way do we go, how do we do it, the Compass service. And our Project Compass initiative has been supported by 42 other private consultancies in London and elsewhere in the UK, and we have a number of eminent patrons behind us, one of whom is our greatly celebrated Angela Brady, who of course comes from this city and has been hugely helpful. Now, why is this important, and what is it also doing? It's linking into a nascent European network that we have set up with some colleagues in Amsterdam, and you'll notice Architecture Locale is the organisation, and they have a Standpunt, which is their help desk, and we are using a similarly masked formulation of information as them, and they are similarly using this roller deck type of display that we are using, so that across Europe we are building up a common standardization and language for the display of this information, and both of us are delivering from this front page a similar amount of information. They've got some different services, they're doing some manual work on theirs. Ours is fully automated, so hasn't got a manual input, as a result of which they are grabbing most of their below overdue notices as well. What we're then doing is taking those both together, and we've created the Fulcrum, which is the European portal, which we are inviting now other international collaborations on. We hope there may be interest coming forward from Ireland to this digital platform on a not-for-profit basis, because we're trying to keep this and maintain this independent within the industry for that purpose. So this links to the overdue notices in the two countries. It gives the client histories and those who are winning's history. It links also to private competitions in the Netherlands, and it provides you full filtering. And as I say, we're inviting into the Fulcrum European network new international partners who we are welcoming and will support the establishment of them in the process. And you don't want to be afraid of all this computing stuff. As we know, it's really quite easy. It's all been made very simple, and that's partly what we're sort of setting out to do, is try and make the processes more accessible and simpler for people. So under our Sesame tab, what we're now able to do on the information that we've been gathering and pulled out of the various notices in construction procurement in the architectural and design sector, we've been able to pull out since 2008 all the information so that we can give you real-time visualizations of actually how the market is moving, how it's trending, whether policy that we've been talking about today is changing and how, and in what manner. You can also look at all the awards that have been issued, their values, and what we're doing here is delivering this sector-specific data with the real-time visualizations, but in a very high grain. So it's not just what you get from the metadata. We're running scripts through this, and we're culling out and pulling the information. We currently have over 17,000 records in the UK. The Dutch are doing the same. We're now being able to evidence what is actually happening in this particular field for the first time. That information was never previously available and is now allowing us to see some of the patterns. And that has led us to be able to publish for the first time in the UK the construction trends reports, copies of which you can get digitally off the site, or if you want the hard copy from us. And this has been looking at regional patterns of distribution. It's been looking at how UK, this is a very interesting one to me, compares in its procurement practice to the rest of Europe, where they're getting greater efficiencies at lower costs in shorter time. And so we've been asking, why is that? And the patterns and distributions are really very different between the countries that we've been looking at, and that has led to further research questions. So this is available on our website. It covers the period 2009 to 2014. We now have the system in place to be able to see how policy might impact on the patterns that have been taking place to date, and for us to also see at an early stage whether or not they are working as intended and deliver feedback accordingly. What is so fascinating about this is we discovered that because we were seeing the forward market in public sector procurement, that we could actually, our forecasting of what was happening in the construction industry was better than the commentators were stating 6 to 9 months later, because we were seeing purchasing rather than supply. No one's gotten onto that one yet. So this standard data protocols that enables us to share and give us the benchmarking that we then feeds, of course, into the Fulcrum. And this is one of a suite of 4 outputs that we have done in Project Compass over the last 18 months or so, 2 years. We've also produced, which I'll be discussing later, design contest guidance. Controversially, we are the people behind the research into the Thames Garden Bridge procurement issues, because we were asked to look at this by GLA members and have been reporting to the press extensively on that. And also we've been looking and providing procurement intelligence into framework appointments currently for SME contractors for the Education Funding Agency in the UK. So we're undertaking research, publication, dissemination, and lobbying to seek better outputs. And when I talk about the education funding agencies, particularly interesting and cautionary tale, as you talk of frameworks here in Ireland. The government set a policy to try and allow SME contractors to engage within the market, specifically an SME framework. They'd already appointed a large contractors framework, but they invited forward onto that exactly the same contractors they had on the larger contractors framework, despite the average minimum call-offs being 200,000 to 2 million. Only one SME contractor actually won a place on the SME, specifically it's called the SME Small Contractors Framework. And these are the sort of roles that we are doing with other participants in industry, National Federation of Builders, for example, to report back on how policy is actually being implemented. So one of all the 43 lots was awarded to an SME regional supplier on the SME framework. Unfortunately, government did not move on this one, although Francis Maud certainly would have, but he came to the end of his term, and I think that's something that should have been reviewed. Now, where are we going? Well, what interests us, and I think particularly, is how the law has confused so many people. We don't really have any issue with the law when you understand it, because what the lawyers are trying to do, God bless them, I'll just quickly add, so you don't all walk out the door, God bless the lawyers, is they're trying hard to articulate principles that are fair and just. But architects draw and lawyers talk. We're all totally dyslexic, and the rest of society isn't a lawyer. So there is this fundamental problem with communication. And you can't collaborate if you can't communicate. And that's the core for us. So what we're doing is we plan to get rid of the lawyers. And how are we going to do that? We have found out that they are logical. You wouldn't believe it. Here is the European directive, which underpins both the British and the Irish public contract regulations. They're logically structured. Way! And whatever is logically structured can be digitally transposed. Way! We're getting there. And because of the mappings, there's clear definitions for all public competition systems above the European thresholds. These can be mapped. So our next project is to digitally map the procurement procedures so that once again the public can get directly involved. They can do it. And we're starting with design contests, because although they sit at the bottom, they are self-contained, and we've already written the guidance, which has been extremely well reviewed. And look what's on the front. Another fabulous Dublin building, because you can aspire to do this as well. And Ian Ritchie is one of our patrons. So, it's mapping time, design contests. So we have developed a mapping structure which accords with the Architects' Council of Europe's policy on design contests, and also with the procedures recommended in policy in the RIBA in 2012. And we have then defined this. We've given all the, and this accords with all the UK requirements, national planning policy and all the other legislation. And we're trying to seek to embed this further in local authority practice. So it's a pretty esoteric part of procurement, because this is the part of procurement which, unlike frameworks, is not team procurement. This form of procurement is really about buying the product. If you want a product as opposed to a team, don't go to a framework. Because if you want the best product, you want Grafton architects, you want Shane de Blockham to come in here and give you a fantastic building. Those are the sort of people you want, not the team. So this is very much for the product. And what does it deliver? The end of the nightmare. Those piles of paper that are engaged with the procurement process. Because what we're delivering is a work implementation platform. We particularly like this because it's a whip. And it's providing the simple digital online procurement. And what it will do is enable you to go through, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the NBS specification system. It's a bit like an NBS specification system in part. You go through, you have a whole range of options with guidance against it, informing you how you can deliver upon your requirements. But on top of that, it will allow you to issue automatically the notices at various points of the contract that you're required to do. At the end of the procedure, it will self-generate a website into which you actually can manage the contract through a secure portal, through another portal through which you can accept all the recipients of the competitive process. And it can be used further on into the procedure. So it's designed for clients seeking to do basically better procurement, but also they can do more procurement with this. Because it's so much cheaper, they can actually engage without the need to aggregate the market to save money. They can do much smaller procurement values in the marketplace. And that's really what we're aiming towards doing, as well as professionalising the service. It's gatewayed the system, and the system will also allow certification at the end through the central procedure. So, I'm not allowed to show you too much, but here's a little picture of something. You wouldn't have the slightest idea what it is, it doesn't really matter. But it's to show how we're progressing. We're through about 60% on this initiative. And we estimate that for this sort of procedural course, it will be saving 60 to 75% of the procedural cost. Basically, it will also, more importantly for us, deliver the service back to the communities, the local councils, the people who may be wishing to do a procurement without engaging some distant consultant. They can now spend their time and money asking the questions about what the project is and honing in on the actual description of the brief. We're inviting research collaboration. UCD may be interested because we're moving forward into our next stage, which is going to be the negotiated procedure. We're starting, unbelievably, with the systems in the UK that have for many years been most unpopular in the appointment of public competitions. Because when we look at the European market, we know that those are the systems giving greater efficiency. Innsbruck, for example, is a city where all the public work, and now most of the private work, is awarded by design contest procedures. And the quality there is extraordinary. We've heard about Austria before. This is the whole city is delivering its public procurement agenda in that way. So after negotiated procedures, we'll be doing DBFM, design, build, finance and management procedures. What else are we doing on the website? Portsmouth. Southern Frontage. I was just talking about this with David earlier. We're running and exploring within the remit of the new public contract regulations under the Directive 2014, innovation in competitive practice, in collaboration. So, going back to our partners, the Dutch, we've got together with them, we're running an international competition. We're going to have 12 people coming in from the Netherlands, 12 people coming in from the UK, invited in both nations by open competition, architects collaborating with landscape engineers, with landscape architects and engineers, under 40, And it's called an elephant cage because the idea is based on the cages at London Zoo, which the elephants are in, by putting big beasts together in a ferment of activity, generating new and fresh ideas. And in this particular context of the southern frontage of Portsmouth, there is a real need. Our society's great challenges of the future are sustainability, and here, with climate change induced rises in sea level, the frontage wall needs to be reconstructed and raised to protect this city. In doing so, the government has only made money available for the actual wall which runs along the coast. And that leaves, in some places, a 3-metre high wall when seen from the land side. This is a city that makes a lot of its money from its tourist economy. And we're bringing these groups together, this synergy of people together, to question the brief. Because one of the great failures in public contracts, public regulations, public procurement, has also been the questioning of the brief and defining what is the best brief in the end. So these groups have been brought together, and they're going to be competitive teams exploring different options, scenarios for how best to do it. And as I say, this is a procurement, is a BIM. It's the early stage of procurement. What we call, it's a BIM procurement. We see it as an electronic facet of the procurement model. And we've been having tremendous success with this. We set it up, as I say, as a voluntary initiative, and that's how it's run. But in the first year, it's a year and a half, 18 months, 62,000 page views, 22,000 sessions. We've got 17,000 users already. And the fulcrum European network has 160,000. And we're about looking at opportunities, not risk. Thank you.